teissTalk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us, and welcome one and all to Thursday's special birthday celebratory episode of teissTalk. And we have got a show for you today. Well, I'm glad we have, really. Otherwise, what are you doing here? Yes, our show today is about identity and zero trust. And we have three fantastic guests lined up for you today. But just before, let's do some parish notices. Up here in the top right of your screen, you will see the chat and Q&A tabs, and as well as polls. You will want to focus on Q&A if you want to win a teissTalk mug. It's brilliant. Hot liquids, cold liquids, you can even put Smarties in it. It's multi-purpose. So if you would like to win one of these much coveted and sought after items, all you have to do is ask us a question in the Q&A. Hopefully it will be about the topic we talk about today, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And I will choose a winner at the end. The judges' decisions are, of course, final. So without further ado, let me bring onto stage our guests today. We have Andrew, Sama, and Mandeep. Welcome onto the stage, please. Hello, Andrew.
Hi there. Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon.
Hello, Sama. Yeah, hello, good. Hello, Sama. And hello to our sponsor, Mandeep. So if you're enjoying your tin of Rover biscuits and your tea and coffee, you can thank Mandeep for that today. Thank you, Mandeep.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me.
No problems. Right. Without further ado, let's jump straight into this, shall we, with our first story. It's from the World Economic Forum. Healthcare cyber attacks are on the rise. Here's why zero trust will prevent care disruptions. And so my question for the group here is, why the hell is zero trust the answer to everything, it seems? All we hear about is zero trust this, zero trust that. Why? What's so special about it? What's it going to do? And also, isn't it just something that never really happens and exists? It's just a journey, as everybody tells me.
I think we have to. I'll sort of jump in. I think we have to recognise that the threat landscape out there has changed, and what I mean by that is the speed of attacks has increased, and I think response times are lagging behind. How can I put some facts behind that statement? We know with the proliferation of remote access to corporate networks, with remote working, the pandemic, and so on, that whole idea of the network perimeter has gone. It's disappeared. So therefore, we've got to get to grips with the fact that, you could say identity is the new perimeter, or you could say there is no perimeter. Therefore, those crown jewels and what really matters to hospitals, healthcare organizations, we've got to bring them within another scope. And if that isn't the network perimeter, then that has to be a kind of another paradigm, another way to think about how we secure that sensitive data. I think zero trust is a buzzword. It's been around for some time. It's a philosophy. It's a framework. I think, you asked, why does it matter? I think for a lot of organizations, it's a big, hairy topic. Where do we start? How much is it going to cost? Legacy IT in the healthcare environment. There's some pretty big problems here to grapple with. And certainly, I think, maybe Andrew can comment on this more from a personal professional perspective. I think from a healthcare perspective, there is a big problem with legacy systems. I think a lot of good work to digitize and move into, the kind of modern era, I guess, of IT environments. But, there's a reality that I think in hospitals as well, in healthcare environments, there's been kind of, holding back from taking a secure first approach in order to, kind of increase productivity and ensure that customers aren't having to deal with authentication requests and so on. So therefore, there's a big mindset shift, I think, that needs to happen. So, that digital transformation needs to occur, security needs to keep up, and then, you can start to think about putting in place some, practical controls that get you on the path to zero trust. But it is a big, hairy topic, and we need to try, as kind of service providers and CIOs and CISOs, the industry, to help, break that down into simpler concepts, and create a program and steps to get to zero trust, which also gets the buy-in, the security, maturity, and reduces the complexity, and kind of just buzz around where do I start with zero trust.
Right. I mean, I agree with Mandeep. If I can come in there, Tom, what is the role in terms of health and care? Well, the public entrust us as part of their care to handle and manage information which supports our patients and citizens. And that trust is broken very easily if we see data mishandled by organisations. And I think, it's not intentional, is it, through those organisations, but there's always continuous improvement. And I think zero trust speaks to that really well in terms of, zero tolerance. We've got to absolutely take this seriously. We can look at statistics and say, in 2022, we saw a 94% increase in healthcare attacks alone, right? And, certainly if I cast my mind back over the last years, we saw WannaCry and the impact that had, Log4j, Conti, and recently we, I guess, saw NHS 111 take a real hit through ransomware, which is, it's really disappointing and upsetting to see that the devastation that brings about on business. So I think in terms of the healthcare environment and our promise to our patients and citizens, we absolutely have to take that seriously. So having a zero tolerance approach to ensuring resilience, robustness, and heightened levels of security, which, every identity that you have, we're seeing actors, players, individuals. So, it's getting smarter. The types of attacks are getting smarter. You can, we're living in polycrisian times where there's war, there's poverty, there's huge industrial implications through action that's been taken through industrial action and dissatisfaction and happiness, and I think they provide a layer of cover which we know actors to work in. So we absolutely do owe it to our patients to be mindful of that and be taking zero trust seriously.
Just to build on Andrew's point, specifically during the pandemic, we saw a massive explosion of ransomware and ransomware as a service targeting healthcare and hospitals. So it's almost the kind of that coin that term, it's the perfect business model for kind of ransomware attacks, in that there's there's critical data, healthcare data. There are many devices in kind of the space of IoT, medical devices, that at the end of that chain, that service chain, is patient safety. It's life critical system. So the perpetuation of ransomware attacks on hospitals since the pandemic has been frankly scary. So and one of the main vectors for launching these attacks is leaked credentials. So we know that leaked credentials are there's a high percentage of breaches that occur through the advent of leaked credentials. So the bad actors out there know that from a defensive perspective, we're thinking about zero trust. So therefore they're not resting on their laurels. They're taking advantage of that with leaked credentials and so on. So you've got to start thinking about authentication, authorization. You've got to start thinking about don't trust any resource, verify, and have continuous monitoring in place. And depending on the vertical, and obviously specifically in healthcare, you've got some big challenges to tackle around getting your systems up to scratch before you can start moving forwards with, okay, well, where is my sensitive data, and where do we start first in terms of applying those controls? So I think it's acutely felt in the healthcare sector.
I would add actually to the technical sides of it. It's definitely the psychological sides, because as you know, in security, we deal with training and awareness almost on a daily basis. That's our everyday thing. And because the weakest link to break into any organization, any system, technically, are always humans. And because they are not digital, they have emotions. So human nature urges people to trust more and verify less, and especially when it comes to healthcare, because even if patients are trained to trust their doctors, otherwise they won't put themselves into that, medical experience. So they have to trust something, and now we're coming to tell them don't trust, verify, which technically it's right against their nature, and that makes zero trust even harder, even to implement within the healthcare sector.
So I want to pick up on a word you used there, Mandeep, and we discussed this in our pre-meet yesterday about zero trust being a philosophy almost. And one of the richest companies in the world, Alphabet, they set up a company from the ground up using zero trust principles, and apparently made it work. Although I've heard recently that it now no longer works. But if Google or Alphabet struggle with their resources, what chance has, frankly, a cash-strapped NHS or healthcare industry got? In fact, any other company, what chance has any other company got to implement zero trust, especially when it's not from the ground up? There's so much, legacy and heritage equipment out there that we have to take into account.
I think it's a fair question and a fair challenge as well. Beyond Corp, which was Google's solution to
I always forget the name of it. I always forget that. I mean,
it's one of those things. It doesn't roll off the tongue that easily. But I think they started thinking about sort of zero trust back in 2011, and I think around 2014 there was a paper published by them in terms of how they got around implementing their architecture. So they're kind of a bit of a pioneer, an early adopter of well, the perimeter's disappeared, so this is our go at zero trust. I think I think in reading that paper, and actually since 2014 to present day, which is almost 10 years ago now. So we were talking about this yesterday. It's been around for some time. I don't think there's ever a perfectly implemented 100% zero trust, implemented architecture. And one of the reasons for that is when you have new applications, you have new threat vectors, you have new, applications being developed. They've got to be integrated within that architecture. So I think it's a journey, not a destination. It's something to strive for within organizations. So therefore, and also you can't go big bang with this kind of thing. You can't create a program structure, go and get budget for your architecture and implement it within 6 months. You've got to start thinking about, okay, well, how do we manage access to our devices? How do we manage access to users? Have we got conditional access in place? What kind of authentication mechanism is appropriate for our organization? So these are very tangible, practical steps that you can take. And all of these components take you on the path to zero trust. And I think Google, by their probably own admission, and other vendors, of which there are many since 2014, that there's kind of a misconception, I think, in customers, and we hear this from some of our customers, that there's a one-stop shop for solution for zero trust. Okay, we'll just buy it off the shelf from vendor X, and in 6 months' time we'll have zero trust and it's fully implemented. We know in cyber risk management it's an ongoing process. It's not when, but if, but when. We're needing to build resilience in place. So it's an ongoing process. Threat vectors change, risks change, the crown jewels within organizations change. So I think there's kind of been a misconception and a steering in the wrong direction about thinking about zero trust. But really what we can do best within the industry, advising customers and organizations, is start with the basics, the fundamentals, the hygiene factors, start to bring more sensitive data and identities within outside of that network perimeter into an arena where you can manage from a verification perspective. And really, we're often hearing from customers, they kind of think, okay, well, we need to authorize and authenticate on a daily basis, but post authentication is often forgotten. So, or kind of not considered. Okay, well, we've got zero trust in place. We're authorizing. We're trusting nothing. We're authorizing and providing access. But post authentication is where that monitoring comes in. So you still need to be looking, kind of detecting anomalous behavior. So, we know with, dare I say it, kind of buzzword bingo, generative AI, we know with, a lot of this, the development of, the explosion of AI, that impersonation of identities through, kind of whether it be video or text or so on, it's going to be really difficult to tell aside, a good actor from a bad actor. So, it's fundamental that, the basics around authentication, for example, have to be in place, and you need to monitor your network.
Yeah. I'm just going to bring up a question that's come in from Mani Manivanan, who's made an early bid for the mug. It's so long it doesn't even fit on the screen. Isn't the problem in healthcare that the IT supply chain is fragmented and there is no cyber framework that enables end-to-end protection from application security, cloud hosting security, network security, device security, and information security? The answer needs to be a common framework and code of practice that the IT supply chain, IT managers, network engineers, and device managers will follow. E.g., AAA has to be end-to-end compatible, frictionless, and easy to monitor compliance.
So
True?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It does need all of those things, but I think going back to what Mandeep suggested, this is part of a continuous improvement process, isn't it? Which is, you put those things in place that are basic, and you build up from that. And I think, there's for every NHS organisation, it follows the Data Security and Protection Toolkit, and they use the standard Cyber Essentials Plus. There's a new cyber security strategy that the department has launched. So that there are frameworks out there that organisations now to be working. There was the DTAC assessment that is looking at all the systems and processes. So there is work underway. Is it enough? Well, I think we'll always be asking that question, won't we? It's Mandeep's point of, it's not a case of if, but when. But equally, we've got to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. But there's some considerable tools around us. What I don't think we can do is, given the pressures you talked about, Tom, in your opening comments, is that it's tough. It is tough right now, and what would be terrible would be something that brought NHS organisations to the knees through a cyber attack, given the level of support and resource that it needs right now to provide the services it does. And that should and is keeping many CIOs focused on this as a priority, but there's always more to do.
I want to take the opportunity to stick a poll out there, which we've got prepared, and we're going to ask another related question at the end of the session, or towards the end of the session. So the first question is: are you currently implementing a zero trust architecture in your organization? So if we could pop that one up on the screen, thank you very much. So please do join in on that poll. There is a comment actually in the chat which I want to pick up on. It's only a journey if you accept that there's no destination, no perfect solution, no perfect architecture, no list of risks completely mitigated beyond everyone's resources other than the informed individual user. What I'll also add is the one problem with a journey is asking for budget for a journey is a lot more difficult because you don't have an endpoint at which point you say we've got a return on investment on our investment, right? And that's part of this. We have to accept and be able to communicate that there is no destination. And that, I think, that's probably it's probably a reason why zero trust is not as prevalent as it should be.
Well, that's right, and I agree with what Andrew and Deep said before on that. And frankly, I can take Google as an example. Google got extreme huge resources that they aligned behind that to keep that journey going. But other organizations may not have the same resources to keep building, and the software, and that's what I'm talking about, the software itself, software behind to avoid using third parties, for example. So technically speaking, not anyone get that kind of resources to support zero trust, even during the journey itself. So, and with Google itself, it showed us, like history showed us, that they didn't succeed in 100% eliminating the dependencies on other systems. which means they are still going with their journey. It can never end, and also depends on the business model. What are you trying to protect? How are you aligning your limited budget? Always remember that security for many CEOs is still a liability, something that is not generating funds. It's just that they remember security always when a disaster happens, but not when a disaster is avoided. Which means those limited budgets that security is provided must be used in a wise way to protect the assets. And with zero trust, those resources will be spread all along that journey, which makes it harder for us to protect what matters.
I think at times it's often useful to drill down a layer below the title zero trust. As an architectural philosophy, if we start to talk about kind of security monitoring, so we talked about needing continuous monitoring, having visibility across your estate, identity governance. So we talked about leaked credentials and securing the identities, whether they be users or devices around your applications. So kind of identity governance, authentication, continuous monitoring. When you really talk about applying least privilege, what do you mean by that? So you're creating conditional access policies. You're having a policy that you construct and you enforce within your organization. So it becomes a little bit more, I think, tangible and acceptable and digestible by boards and through IT organizations and security teams when you take away kind of the zero trust point term and you start drilling that down into almost titles for projects that have a defined kind of budget and outcome and will drive you. It will reduce the blast radius in your environment. It will reduce your attack surface, which reduces your risk, which reduces dollars spent from mitigating reputational damage, etc. So you start to talk in the language of a board and a CEO, which ultimately is where you need to get the sponsorship for any zero trust program. But starting to distill that into projects and kind of another layer down of controls will start to make a little bit better sense and be more useful, I feel.
So I want to make a comment or pick up on a comment and ask a question, and we're going to move on to the sort of panel proper. But this is we're going to stay on. This is still really good stuff. So there was a comment from Michael, so not eligible, I should say, for the mug. NIST 800-171 Rev 3 got released for comment yesterday, and that hits all of Manny's questions. But the fact that Rev 3 exists means that this will never be finished. Much like zero trust, it would seem. But the question I want to ask here, which I think is a very good one, a very simple one as well, is from Adiri. Thank you, Adiri. What compromises does a typical organization have to make zero trust work? That's a really good point.
So I think Mandeep made a good point about your board involvement, and there absolutely is the sponsorship of the board, and let's be clear on that. This is everybody's responsibility, not just the CIOs. I think you can take the board on the journey, but what is the risk appetite in the organisation like for a cyber attack? If it's making difficult decisions about resources for day-to-day operations and running services, all of these decisions come out in essentially those board level discussions about how we're going to prioritize resources and funding. But I think there's also a lot that can be done which is free. For example, one of the most powerful things I think we try and do is raise awareness of what zero trust means and what to do in the event of a cyber attack. What happens in that moment, and what practical advice can we give to staff to help protect themselves, protect the assets? I think Mandeep and Sama talked about credentialing. Well, what can they do to protect those and run tabletop exercises, run awareness, have poster campaigns, perhaps have screensavers, and keep a regular rhythm to that discussion. And while that's not everything, it is a significant part of your organisation that if there's people are often the challenge in our own organisations, aren't they? Just simply setting a fairly robust password, for example, might be one of those challenges. But I think by creating a dialogue with every level of the organisation, taking the opportunity for briefings, training, helps that programme. Meanwhile, depending on what your risk appetite of your board is, there are tools which IT departments need to support the service perimeters and surveillance and all the rest of it that help that zero trust. And I think what you have to do is look at your gaps based on the frameworks that are available and plug the most significant ones first and work building on that process.
Yeah, just to build on Andrew's point, I think so. The trade-off I think occurs around that risk appetite. So what risks is and I think John Cornley in the chat just asked, surely the risk appetite of the boards, area cyber attack is very low. I think it depends. Obviously it depends on the vertical, the industry, depends on the organisation, what matters to them. The attitude and experience of the board, those that sit, have responsibility for security and IT. But you can never. I don't think you can have 100% cybersecurity or 100% zero trust. You are making trade-offs, and that's based on your business objectives. So that's why you've got to tie, your investments around cybersecurity and zero trust and these projects to your business objectives and how you want to manage that risk appetite against your security posture and the journey you need to go on. But I think Andrew made another point. In terms of again, not if but when. That resiliency. So in the event of a breach, how prepared are you? What is your failover like? How do you restore systems? What is the security culture like within your organization? I think security culture is huge when it comes to zero trust because it is that paradigm shift. But it's, again, I kind of use this term a little bit, but how do you reduce your blast radius? How do you reduce that attack surface? And actually through some of the granular projects underneath that zero trust concept, micro segmentation without going sort of too technical, but creating time boxed small segments from an application and user perspective that have only access to what they need at the right time for the time that they need it, and then that's revoked. So that kind of makes sense, but it's not that easy to implement. But there are big vendors out there, like you mentioned Alphabet, Google, Tom, Microsoft and AWS, or other players out there that have invested, super heavily into security, and they're starting to look at more mature versions of these architectures. And they use partners that wrap, their service capability around their products, and so they can, these partners can work with organizations to, roll out Azure AD, for example. Azure Active Directory, from a Microsoft perspective, helps you apply conditional access. It helps you to choose the appropriate method of authentication, be it MFA or federation, for your on-prem environment, and also offers solutions to help you look at elevated permissions within your organizations. You may have contractors that have left your business years ago, perhaps, potentially. We've seen this in customers that still have access to sensitive areas. Only just recently, with the example in the US, can we see that's still a problem even for the Pentagon? But there are vendors who have already kind of taken that step and have invested heavily, and there are partners out there that can help you on these journeys.
Yeah. So I want to close the poll. So we've got our responses in, and it's almost a three-way split, which is quite interesting. And we'll be answering, or we'll be opening that poll up again in literally about 10 minutes. But yeah, so it's almost an exact three-way split, but we seem to be yes, no, and don't know, which is a fair enough one. So we'll see. We'll have a follow-up question on that one shortly. We do have, I have also been reliably informed that through the application of technology, a liberal sprinkling of fairy dust, chewing gum and sticky tape, we're live on LinkedIn. And if you are watching us through LinkedIn, you can ask a question through the comments and it will appear here. So, just so you know. Okay, so that's that obligation done. Now we've got another a question here. Raza Sadiq, how has the resilience framework requirements in financial services helped ensure the visibility is clearer? Has it helped the speakers in helping continual assessments, stress testing results, workshops?
Just trying to get a sense of the question.
Yeah.
So there are clearly highly regulated industries such as the financial services sector, which have very specific compliance requirements. I think the individual there is talking about resilience. I think I get a sense of the question: has that requirement within the financial services industry driven the requirement for making the case to invest in, a zero trust project and architecture? I think it's certainly helped make the case. I think if I take financial services as a specific industry, I think some of the security controls are potentially becoming a bit outdated, and sometimes do rely heavily on just kind of making sure we're within that financial services organization have a tick in the box from a compliance perspective. So I think there has to be a leaning into using more sophisticated threat intelligence because of that threat landscape out there, and zero trust architectures to move things up on a step. And resilience is part of that. You're going to have resilience if you're reducing again that blast radius and that attack surface, and you are confident that the IP and the data that matters to that to that bank, that financial services organization, is in a space within the environment that is protected as best as possible. So it's a little bit of a fluffy answer, but I think the requirements in financial services, be it resilience or otherwise, driven from regulation and compliance, are helping them make the case, but there's still a long way to go. So again, I'd kind of personally advise starting with some of those building blocks around kind of looking at permissions creep, looking at elevated privileges, locking those down, creating some micro segmentation, applying conditional access policies. So all of these things are very tangible, and you can start looking at ask the question today: do we have those controls in place in our information security program? And then you can find out the reality and see if you can maybe take some steps to improve the situation.
Sorry, Sam, go on.
The regulatory part of the financial industry made it more resilient, of course, to all to all the different attacks that we're seeing, especially in the healthcare industry. But also, the financial industry itself, it's based on trust. That's why there's the name trust behind, beside every bank's name. There's always a trust, because we have to trust the system. Otherwise, why would you put your money in a bank? So, and the other part of it, the financial industry relies on humans. Till now, it relies on humans. They call them trust officers, and those are the officers. Actually, they run the business. So, which means it's they need to move first into a digital transformation before we can, we have the digital fingerprint for that industry. Of course, with the presence of blockchain and Web3 now, it's a huge transformation. Especially within the financial industry, and hopefully it's taking us into great places and more transparency within that ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, and Samer and Mandeep. I think I agree with that. I mean, whether it's financial services industry or aviation or any services, I think there are always lessons to be learned that actually may have context or add context to what services you're providing. I think, one of the things, presumably with financial services, is the end game is, the money. One of the things within health, of course, is such, we talk about information as assets. One of the information assets that health and care has, of course, is it's such a rich data source, which enables, I guess, if used in a certain way, convincing and compelling information for bad actors to utilize that to access. So, I think one potentially purports to support another thing and creates this kind of vacuum of intelligence that, if your end game is fraudulent access to funds, then that one may feed the other. But I think equally, any cyber incidents that's happening, I would be interested in learning the lessons from financial services or other, and I think we can learn from other industry.
Agree with that. And in fact, there was I think it was a Deloitte report from 2021 around the evolving threat landscape, specifically towards financial services, and talked a lot about, obviously, clearly the obvious, crown jewels there are, financial money, cash, but the nation state actors, whether it be a highly skilled individual kind of bedroom hacker, or it be a hacktivist, these disparate groups are using common infiltration methods, and they're not always after the crown jewels. They're after, they want to disrupt. They want to make a point from a social or political perspective, and they want to create a bit of a mess. So it's a very complex threat landscape out there, and they are harnessing those potential influenceable insiders, malicious insiders, to their advantage. So when you think about, again, malicious insiders, remote workers, evolving threat landscape, you've got to have a very different approach to the way you're doing things. You've got to update your control posture.
Now, we've obviously squarely moved into the panel discussion, talking about the role of identity here, and there's a great question here from Manny, who has obviously streaked into the lead towards the mug now with his many questions. What is the usefulness of role-based identity in healthcare? This is primarily one for you, I think, Andrew, although I'm sure everybody can answer. When one person carries out multiple roles across multiple trusts, i.e. identity is not just attached to a name, but needs to be flexible.
Yeah, and sure, let's acknowledge what a challenge that is. But coming back to my first point is, having a process. Mandeep touched on it in terms of things like Active Directories and things where you've got role profiles which enable users to access what they need to access, what they need to know. And I think that has the the parameters of a house. If you imagine a house and it's open and all of its doors are open, and somebody walks into that house and they can access every single room, and you work backwards and close off the rooms that perhaps they don't need to go in, I think is an ongoing job. But it is a responsibility then for our staff. And again, coming back to that public trust, the patient trust, and the trust between the patient and the consultant, or consultant and a patient and a nurse, is built on that. So we have to, and as a senior information risk owner in the organisation, have to provide assurance that, again, we are looking continually at ways of improving that, while enabling people to do their work. I think that's the key thing. And there's a risk there, isn't it? Which is there's nothing more risky than, if we're short on resources in the IT holding up people from doing their job because they haven't got sufficient access. But again, it's got to be right and proportionate. And of course, professionally registered staff have a duty and code of confidentiality to be professional in their work. But we also have a duty to protect that information and make sure that's available and need to know. So it is something we're continually having to review and look at to make sure it's right and fit for purpose. And I think, Active Directory is one way of helping manage starters and leavers within an organisation. But when you've got something as the breadth of the NHS and staff moving around, I think we are getting better at that. But again, using the words of continuous improvement and that process, I think is something we continue need to develop.
So do you think those human factors are... go on, Simon, what were you going to say?
Not too far from what Andrew just mentioned, the old requirements for many audit firms were role-based, access management and with access databases. But with the latest, in the past few years, with the latest attacks, that's not viable maybe anymore. It's more on the need to know, and especially for the insider attacks, as we've seen in the defense department lately, that the defense department, especially the DoD, the Department of Defense, they place all those great security controls around their technical systems, but they can't prevent somebody holding their phones and taking pictures for documents. Yeah. So that's the need to know, and it's a different. We are solving technically a different problem here. We are asking ourselves: does this person need to know this information? Does that person need to know all the information or part of it, and is it required for today's job? So it's instantaneous.
I fully agree, and just on that point around the move from thinking about role-based access to to Samer's point, does this individual user device need that access? I kind of frame that as thinking about permissions as opposed to roles. So again, if I pick if I take another Microsoft solution. It's entry permissions management. And actually, there's another paradigm we haven't touched on here, which is multi-cloud. And obviously, there's an adoption of cloud, but also multiple tech stacks, be it Google, AWS, Azure, and then also coupling in hybrid on-prem environments. So it's a pretty complicated environment out there with users, devices, and resources within these cloud environments. And sometimes an assumption, obviously, as we know, when digital transformation occurs, the cloud security stuff will take care of security. So this permissions management solution, sort of building what Samer mentioned, allows you to get a view of something called permissions creep index. So, well, actually, why does that user or resource over there have permission to that stuff over there, and why have they had it for 10 years? Oh, they haven't even been in the organization for the last 10 years. So you can start to feed in, some KPIs and measures of, permissions creep, which is, I think, another angle to support your zero trust journey.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to pick up on something you talked about, Andrew, about the human element here, and I think that human element. Do you think that's one of the key obstacles to adopting, zero trust? That change element and that ability to do their job. Do you think that's a key issue?
I think it is. I think within all of our work, one of the key things we've seen really scale up is the focus on cybersecurity, and I think to a level whereby we're all talking about it more frequently. We're seeing events in the news, and I think there is a gradual awareness. But I think sometimes we're human, aren't we? And sometimes we've always done what we've always done, and it's difficult to change and difficult to change in our ways we behave with and interact with computing technology. And because that's constantly moving, there's a lot, of course, IT departments are doing in the background. But I think we can't ignore the workforce. We've absolutely got to take them with us. We've got to take the IT department work forward. We've got to be able to train and develop them. And, that's as important as the tools themselves, isn't it? If we can't develop our people, then we're going to get behind the curve. And I think that's one of the challenges. And, for me, when we're talking about risk, it's people are a significant risk on that in terms of that kind of appetite. So, that is something that we come back to time and time again, is how do we continue to educate and develop the workforce, our IT department? How do we just communicate that in simple messages, simple tasks you can do? And people remember. I think that's a really helpful thing to do. And by being repetitive, you kind of get that 80-20 change and people start to come with you. And actually, what I have seen is more people saying to me, Andy, I did see an email. It was strange looking, and I sent it on to such and such, the spam folder or what have you, or our department for further investigation. So that level of awareness is actually engendering the right behaviours we want to start to see in the organisation. But I think it takes continuous effort, and repetition is a useful way, I think, of making sure you're communicating frequently with the business and ensuring they're adhering to those things. But yeah, Tom, to answer the question, I think those human factors are a massive part of this. And as well as a strategy that's making sure your technical stacks are where they need to be, is what is your plan for your people?
So thank you. We're going to draw this to a close. Thank you, Andrew. Your tech nearly made it to the end. We lost you towards that. Well, we lost your lovely image, but we heard your dulcet tones nonetheless. I want to and we've lost him completely now. Oh, he's back. I wanted to highlight the poll, which most of you have now answered. So if the answer was no previously on have you adopted Zero Trust, are you now looking to consider it? I think, well, this is good news, actually, since half of you are saying primarily, yes, you are. I think it was, 7 or 8 of you answered no before. So I think on the whole, this, if nothing else, this may have broken down some barriers. Now, we have very little time left. So I'm going to go around the table. I'm hoping Andrew is there. Andrew, are you there? Can we hear you? No. So Mandeep, I'm going to give you 10 seconds. What's the one thing people can do when they get back to their desks tomorrow morning when it comes to Zero Trust?
Ask your teams the question, ask your board the question, what can we do to reduce the blast radius of an attack? What can we do to reduce the attack surface? And can it be a component of Zero Trust? If the answer is yes, go and implement it.
Okay. And Sama?
I would urge them to technically to go and read all the literature that have been written so far on Zero Trust, align it with their executive strategic plan, and educate everyone in the company about it.
Yeah. And Andrew, I see you're back. Andrew, 10 seconds. What's the one thing people should do around Zero Trust when they get back to their desks tomorrow? No. Tap the microphone, it seems. Perhaps you could put it across in Morse code. I don't know. No, I think we've lost Andrew. That's such a shame. I think that would have been a lot. I think that would have been a lovely round off today. So I'd like to thank our panelists, Andrew, Sama, and our sponsor, Mandeep. Thank you so much. This has flown past. You didn't shut up, any of you. So I think that for me, that's a success as far as I'm concerned. So thank you so much. I'd like to remind everybody that we have another session next week. Are InfoSec leaders emotionally literate enough? Given some of the CISOs I've met, probably not. But we shall find more out next Thursday. There is also on the 26th of September in London, the R3 conference, Resilience, Response and Recovery. And I'm going to award 2 mugs today because we had loads of questions. Adiri for that really simple compromise question. Thank you, Adiri. And to Manny, who, just kept on typing, it seemed, all the way through. Just didn't give up for that one question that didn't even fit on the screen to the other following questions. So, Manny, Adiri, thank you so much. I'm going to leave you with my own experience of identity, which is, when I recently had my identity stolen, the thief actually came back and asked for a refund, which was a little bit of a shock. So, on that note, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you once again to the panelists. I look forward to seeing you all next week. Bye-bye.